Okay, hello, Jim. My name is Avgustinos, as we have previously been introduced. I am from Cyprus. We are talking from many kilometers away. You are from Oregon, yeah?
That's correct. Yep, just over the Northern California border in a town called Medford.
Mm-hmm. So it would be appreciated if you can share with us what do you do, what do you actually do now, and of course, what did you do with regards to wildfires and with your experience? Please let us know your rich, I'm sure, portfolio.
Yeah, sure. So I got into the wildland fire a little bit late in life compared to some of my other comrades. It was mid to late 90s where I really started getting interested in it, and worked my way up through a number of positions, mostly focused on information and liaison, where you communicate with the public and you kind of ride herd or keep folks informed who are elected officials and stakeholders and folks like that. I was the primary liaison officer and information officer on a Type 1 team for a number of years. I've worked some of the larger incidents in the U.S. and was eventually selected to be on a cadre for our top-level incident management team training for the Command and General Staff folks. So I did that for a few years, and then I retired and have kept involved doing a number of things, including supporting a number of Department of Health agencies at the state and local level here in the U.S. during the pandemic, and doing training and just kind of offering advice and consolation at times when it's necessary. I've worked a number of fatality incidents, including the Granite Mountain hotshots. So that's kind of my quick background. And been interested in kind of the academic side, particularly since I retired, in the academic side of incident management and the incident command system. And so trying to figure out how we bring together practitioners and academics to kind of further our understanding, because I don't think we as practitioners have the time and energy to devote to really looking at new processes and evaluating things. And I don't think the academics really understand the totality of complex incident management. And so if we can get those two together, I think we can generate some good discussion. And to that end, I'm leading a field trip in a couple of weeks for a graduate class from Oregon State University, along with some visiting professors, to go look at some of the fires we might have and see how they're managed, and talk about incident command system and all sorts of good stuff.
Wow. So yeah, we have a very rich portfolio, and you have worked with very big incidents, yeah? So
yes,
rich experience on that. And we know for sure that the incidents in US are quite big in contrast with what we have in Europe. You have vast territories under flames and very unpredictable fire behaviors due to the actual landscapes and the winds and the whole climate, the self-induced climate that the wildfires create on those environments. I have been following for some years now the US and the exponential steps forward that you're doing, and it's amazing, really. So for those who are watching this, how I met Jim, I just know Jim a couple of days now. We exchanged a couple of texts into Twitter. So I have found a tweet of his, and I said, okay, I need to really speak to this guy. I will read that with your permission, Jim.
Sure.
I will read this tweet feed. So here we go. I have no direct experience with UK fires, but watching from afar, I suspect much of Europe is where we Americans were a few years ago. We realized things had changed, that fires were larger and more intense more often, but our old systems were still in place and mostly working. Until 1 year, they were not. We are not ready to transform systems built in the mid-20th century into what was needed for the rapidly changing conditions of the ground. Some understood, but inertia and entrenched expertise built in a world that no longer existed held the power. Politics, budget, personnel, training, tactics, prevention, recovery, culture, and everything else needed to be reformed. If that day is not here for my European friends, it soon will be. Start working on it now. The first thing you can do is to look at your culture. Here in the US, we've made a slow turn away from the tactical to an emphasis on strategic thinking and planning. We can no longer initial attack fires for days on and only rely on anchor and flank. By necessity, we've gone from let's get it done to let's figure it out. Encourage folks to make that leap from tactical to strategic. Imagine worst case scenarios and understand how you would respond. Then imagine an even worse case and work that on too. Start encouraging independence of thought throughout the organization. Complex incidents are too much for one person to fully grasp, and there are too many decisions to be made at all levels and across the organization for hierarchical control to be efficient. Provide good objectives and trust your people to make solid decisions with those objectives in mind. By doing this, you grow the next generation of leaders too. As responders, we now are forced to make choices because of the fire environment and the availability of resources to do everything we'd like to do. We can't make those choices without an ethical grounding and solid thinking beforehand. We also must test our assumptions. If you have expertise built in yesterday's world, are your solutions to today's problems still valid? This hurts because it can delay decision making. Still, better to make a slightly delayed good choice than a bad quick choice. If you have a leadership stuck in the past, become an advocate and work on the next generation of leaders. If you have people who find power in controlling info, get rid of them. We can't face what's coming with selfishly protected info. Build up interagency cooperation and coordination. Share and exchange. Work those scenarios with others. Enhance relationships and iron out differences before the stress hits. Put them along with your culture change. If you don't have a good cadre of public information specialists, start building that capacity now. Make sure they can talk across jurisdictional lines and are able to coolly share complexities with the public. Start changing the public's assumptions too. They need to know that it is now a different world and that their past experiences may not be as relevant as they once were. Simplify things as much as possible, but don't make them any simpler. Trust your communities. Strive to become a learning organization. Work on internal communications every day. Even if you can't address the political and social barriers right now, you do have some control over your culture. If you prove that, it's easier to get folks to look at the other issues. It takes a lot of effort to change the political assumptions regarding risk and wildland fire. After all, risk is hypothetical, and getting politicians to seriously engage on prevention for a hypothetical risk is tough indeed. And then they need to fund it continually. It's much easier to throw money at an ongoing disaster. Still, start talking now. Plant the seeds. Recovery is another tough sell. As up to now, there probably hasn't been a great need. As more communities are affected, that need will rise. Please know I and many others here in the US feel for you. If you need help or even just a little reassurance, I'm sure there are hundreds over here that will gladly assist. Until then, we'll keep pushing smart change here. Stay safe, friends. So that was it. You know, there is a lot of emotion into that narrative you have put on Twitter, and maybe that's the reason why it has gained so many retweets and so many comments from across the globe. And actually, this is what I felt when I read it. I saw some relevance on that narrative, and I saw a person that have been through different stages to be here and sit here with me and have a chat. So what's the biggest obstacles that you have identified on changing the culture, on making the shift in the culture? Let's talk about the communities before we go to the actual fire services.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest hurdles is a lack of imagination, right? The wildland fire environment is incredibly complicated, immensely complex, so dynamic. And there are lots of reasons for why things burn. But what we're seeing, I think, in the field, in the fires that I've been on, and what the scientists are telling us align very well. And that is that climate change is becoming the major driver in wildland fire behavior. And trying to imagine what the world was going to be like in 5 or 10 years versus what your experience is leading up to now is a very tough thing for people to understand and people to comprehend and really think about, because we rely on our past experiences, and that gives us our own expertise, right? We're experts in wildland fire because we have done all these other things. But now that expertise is uncertain. It may or may not apply to future events in a way that was never questioned before. That ability to test your assumptions constantly, to evaluate your experience and see if it still applies, I think that is a really tough thing for us humans to do. And so I think we can easily get into a trap, and we've seen it here in the US with some of our thinking and approaches, where you rely on the past, but the past is no longer valid.
Wow. So what tools you brought out of your toolbox to make that shift, to overcome this? If you may ask, of course.
So one of the first things we did was we tried to change the training approach. When I went through training to become a Type 1 Command and General Staff member, it was very much, here's an input, deal with it, and you just sat there and just hit inputs back over the net as they were logged at you. And it really didn't test anything. It just tested maybe your ability to handle the stress of pretend incident while others were evaluating you. But it didn't really show you anything. And the criticisms you got back then were, hey, you did that badly, try to do that better. And that was essentially the extent of it. You had to figure a lot out on your own. So when we looked at where we were and where we're going and what that meant for our training, we decided to shift that training to a more strategic approach. So now our top level training for Command and General Staff members is you're given an incident and you have to come up with a strategy for that. And there are very few inputs, but what you have to do is you have to go out and collect information. So in the past, we would have role players with inputs that would come in and give you scenarios. Now you have to reach out to the role players to get information from them. And it might be, the local fire officer, it might be the local elected official, or whatever the case might be. Whatever information you need to build a common operating picture for your incident management team and develop a strategy for dealing with that incident that can incorporate not only what's happening right now, but what you anticipate might happen. We've really kind of focused on that strategic aspect of it. And that also lines up better with the way adults learn. And in previous kind of training, it was very much, seem very childish in some ways. So this puts the emphasis on the person thinking and being strategic and coordination of the team and developing that team strategy and that team common operating picture. And so I think it's working out quite a bit better and preparing us better for the kinds of incidents we're facing and will face.
With regards to communities and the members of the public, of course, in US, you have faced wildfires way before Europe has, especially the so-called mega fires. How did that transition found the members of the public, and how have you informed the members of the public further about what's coming? Or
yeah, well, it's a similar dynamic and a similar challenge, right? Because if you live in a town and you had a fire 30 years ago, your image of fire and what you think about the current status of wildland fire is very much tied to that fire you had 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And now a new one comes and it's completely different. But you're still working under the assumptions of the old fire. So part of our job, and it's a very difficult one, is to bring the public along and try to adjust their expectations, right? We're not going to be able to put every fire out here in the U.S. Right away. We're going to have to, there are going to be fires that are going to be on the landscape for, days, weeks, maybe even months here. And so we have to adjust the public's perception and their expectations. And that's very hard to do, particularly given, the political climate we have in the U.S., where there's a group that is very adamantly opposed to just the idea of climate change. We take it as our responsibility to not only help communities with the current incident, but to prepare them for future ones. And if there's no acceptance about what the future is going to be and how changes are going to occur, then it's very difficult to get them prepared. So it's a struggle, but I think every year we get a little bit better at it, and every year we make a little more progress. And the interesting thing is you can't really simplify that, right? You have to address the complexities, and I think people are more respectful of it when you do that. Because if you simplify things too much and then something happens that is outside that simplified description, now you're having to explain why that happened. If you level with folks and are clear about some of the complexities you're facing, then they're more accepting when something happens outside of their expectations. So again, there's some trial and error and some repetition that needs to take place. But I think we'll eventually get there because they'll not only hear from us, they'll also see with their own eyes what's going on.
So is there any specific training for the people that they live within the wildland urban interface? Because those people are actually the more resilient ones or the most aware than the others. So is there any specific, do you engage the members of the public apart from the public communication programs? Do you provide any specific training, or how is that works?
We don't provide any specific training as agencies. Mm-hmm. There are some efforts, some private efforts that focus on reduction of fuels around homes and communities. Firewise is one of those, and probably the largest and most effective effort that we have. And then during the off season, in terms of when there aren't large fires going, if there's really an off season anymore, which is obviously but if we're in a prescribed fire environment, if we're in a fuel reduction environment, then there's opportunity for communications affiliated with those actions as well. So we try to keep things up constantly throughout the year and explain not only what we're doing, but why we're doing it. And I think that's the key. You have to say what, obviously. I think a lot of people stop there. but you go into the why, and again, don't be afraid to address the complexities of the why.
Yeah. Is that under any legislation, the actual provision of awareness or training, or the actual reduction of fuels? Is it?
There's no legislation here in the U.S. that applies to individual homeowners in that regard.
I mean, community-wise.
Communities, same thing.
Yeah, same thing.
So a lot of that is being driven by experience. Some of it's being driven by insurance companies who see their costs rising and are reacting in, a fiscally prudent way. So it's in the United States, we're probably a little more individualistic in terms of our government's approach to things than some other places. So that, again, that's part of our challenge, is to try to understand all of that and still make a difference in the community.
Yeah. So what made you wrote that narrative on Twitter, Jim, if I'm asking? What intrigued you to write it? Because there are a lot of information there, lots of information.
Yeah, so, I've taken an interest in the international wildland fire community in recent years, because I've seen climate change, not only how it affects the U.S., but I was starting to see news articles about fires popping up in places that I had never seen news articles about fires before. And so I started really getting interested in looking at the world wildland fire situation several years ago. And of course, you had the horrible year in Australia.
Yeah.
There have been, fires throughout just about every country that I can name, including, I think a couple of years ago, there was even one in Greenland for a little bit. So, what I find interesting is we have countries and places coming online for wildland fire in a noticeable way that were never there before. And so there's not the experience, there's not the understanding. They haven't had time to think through many of the issues that we have. Even if we haven't solved all of them, we've been thinking about them. And so it's just, I saw the heat wave, and it just seemed like an appropriate time just to write down a few thoughts. Yeah,
it was a great thing to do. And especially what struck us the most, I think, are the image from UK. You've seen a fire of that velocity burning in UK. It really affects you. It really makes you wonder. Of course, we have fires in Antarctica and Siberia that are burning for months and months. But especially UK, because of the climate, the UK, it's cold and wet or foggy. That's the climate of UK. But when we see those images, when we see these record-reaching temperatures, 40.3 Celsius, I mean, we're speaking about the real deal here, and it really struck you, and it makes you think what will be the next years, what will follow the next years to come. And I do believe that it will be a great challenge for the fire rescue services around the globe, around Europe, because I live in a European territory. And of course, for UK, it will be a great challenge. It will be not a great, it will be a real challenge for the fire rescue services, the firefighters, because they will be dealing with unprecedented situations, incidents of that require vast amount of resources that have not utilized or faced in the past. Yeah.
And different kinds of training and different kinds of thinking about
Absolutely.
fire too, right? So if you're rooted in the structural world, wildland poses some challenges that you may not have thought about. So that training has to occur, has to take place, and it needs to be practiced as well.
Yeah, training is a big one, and I do believe as well that the perception of the risk is not taken as objectively as it should be. I believe that, of course, risk is, as you said, it's not objective, it's per person, but the risk perception varies from person to person and from agency to agency. But there are a lot of evidence out there right now for people to really see what's coming. And as you wrote, let me read it, what you wrote. Start talking now, plant the seeds, because it's coming. So sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
You're about to say something?
Oh, I was going to talk a little bit about risk.
Please do.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting that some of the comments I got back on the Twitter thread were from folks saying, "Oh, this is a good thread, but here we have helicopters, we have engines, we have airplanes, we have all the things we need." Well, I was thinking about that, and what that is in many ways, I think, is a trap, because again, you're applying prior experience to a changing environment. And if you think about only things like engines and planes and
suppression
helicopters, right, then you're kind of bound by the experience you have in the past. And so you would tend to use those things in the same way without looking at maybe the changing risk assessment. And the other thing I think that happens is when we talk about risk, we often talk about things. And we need to change that more to people, right? The risks are going to be there. It's the exposure of the people to the risk that is key. So we need to evaluate risk not from something that might happen, but the exposure of people to that thing that might happen. And then I think that it creates a pretty big intellectual shift in how we look at risk and the chances we're willing to take. And it's a ongoing process here in the U.S. We're trying to really focus on risk exposure now more than just the old idea of risk. I'm probably not explaining it very well, but I think if you think of people first, then that's going to center you because obviously with these changing conditions, it's the people that are most important, not the things.
So what do you mean exactly about risk exposure? What methodology are you using to expose public to that risk?
If we think about risk, right? So the fire is going to be there, trees falling down are going to be there, rocks are going to roll. There's, helicopters may crash, and so on. So instead of looking at those things, rocks and trees, we look at people and we say, okay, how much exposure are we willing to tolerate for people in this environment? And is that risk worth it? If something happens, if folks do come to some kind of harm, was that risk worth taking? And then I think if you think about people more than things, then that leads you to sometimes different conclusions about your acceptance of risk.
Yeah, because people are the vulnerable ones. Yeah, absolutely. So right now in the US, how many agencies are employed to face wildfires, to dealing with wildfires, suppression, etc.? So how many agencies of that? Loads?
Yeah. So I'll start with the federal. All right.
Yeah.
So at the federal level, there's the United States Forest Service, there's the Park Service, there's the Bureau of Land Management, there's the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and there's the Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's also the Department of Defense, which has installations around the country, bombing ranges and such that have wildland fires. And then there are the states. Just about all of the states have a forestry department that also takes on wildland fire. And then there are many counties and cities that have wildland fire capacity because they tend to get urban interface fires, or they have wildlands within their boundaries. So it's a big mesh of federal, state, and local agencies. Like, if you look at Los Angeles, California, obviously there's LA City has a fire department, LA County has a fire department, state of California has an agency, CAL FIRE, and then the Forest Service has numerous national forests around the perimeter of Los Angeles and in Los Angeles County. So all those people come into play when something happens, and that's that was actually one of my jobs as a liaison officer, was trying to get everybody to mesh together and row in the same direction. And it can be difficult sometimes because
every time.
Yeah, every time, because agencies have different ideas about risk. For instance, they have different ideas about suppression. They have different objectives, different responsibilities, and so trying to get everyone aligned and walking in the same direction is extremely difficult sometimes.
Absolutely. So who has the latest word? So who overacts those agencies, or who decides the decision making, the final decision making from who? Which agency?
So that's a great question. We have a National Interagency Fire Center in Boise, Idaho, and we have a National Wildland Fire Coordinating Group, which is made up of representatives from state, local, and federal agencies. And so they're the ones that set policy, wildland fire policy, and standards, and all sorts of things. And the National Interagency Fire Center has responsibility for the national resources. The national resources are things like air tankers, hotshot crews, Type 1 helicopters, the big helicopters, the kitchens that support an incident, that feed 1,000 or more firefighters, and so on. So all these national resources are coordinated out of the National Interagency Fire Center, and they do it based on priorities, mostly values at risk. So if there is a large fire and it's threatening, a suburb of Denver, for instance, then that's going to be a high priority fire, so they're going to get more national resources versus a fire in a county in Montana that's far away from a lot of population centers. So that coordination is at a national level. When you get down to individual incidents, what happens often is we form either a unified command or a multi-agency coordination group that kind of sets the priorities for that incident.
Sounds like not an easy task to do, to liaise with all those and the final decision making. So many agencies. I believe in the most countries it's the same thing. All these sectors, departments, people, agencies being involved in such an incident, it's such a big task. And for you, that you were a liaison officer, obviously you have seen and experienced the hurdle of bringing all those agencies together for that goal, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little bit of a funny story.
Yeah.
For most of us in the federal wildland fire world, we don't go by rank, right? We don't have stars or bars or any of that kind of thing on our uniform. We just know, oh, he's the incident commander, he's the deputy incident commander. You just kind of know. But when you go down to Southern California, they're very much into rank. So my incident management team carried a big bag of of stars. And so when we'd go down to Southern California, we would pass those out and be like, oh, you look like a 4-star, you look like a 3-star. And we just hand them out. And so we'd have to wear them or people wouldn't take us seriously. If we weren't wearing anything on our collars, then folks would be like, who are you? I'm not paying attention to you. But if you had, a battalion chief marker on your collar or something, they'd be like, oh, yeah, we need to pay attention to you. So we would do that. And then at the end of the incident, we'd pick them all back up and put them back in the bag and put them in the suitcase and wait for the next incident in Southern California. So, there's just different cultural approaches throughout the United States, and I'm sure that is definitely the case in Europe as well, no doubt.
Yes, absolutely, and it's a fine limit between discipline and respect and everything. It's not an easy task as well, and it varies from department, from area, etc. Going back to that Twitter feed, and it triggered some, not reactions, but some feedback from colleagues around the globe. And it's good, actually. It's good to hear the opposite opinion. I believe that it's through argument, it's through problems and through discussion that we will move forward. And yes, in Europe, there are some countries that, of course, they make huge steps forward, and I believe they took many lessons from the US, and I believe that this summer will be a catalyst for a change. Hopefully, countries will realize that no country is immune to wildfires. We've seen UK, we've seen Germany, and we are still in the middle of the summer, and we have some pretty harsh days ahead of us. So, of course, it's not over, and it's only starting. And we need to collaborate with each other. We need to exchange ideas, as you said at the beginning, to bridge that gap between the actual practitioners and the researchers, the academics. I think there is a lot of experience from the practitioners, and there is a lot of knowledge from the researchers and academics that can and should, or must be shared to each other. And there is a tendency now in Twitter, I have been engaging with many, both practitioners and researchers, and I see that building up. It's getting there. I think it's getting there. Everyone, those who truly believe that we should do that we must collaborate, and that we need to move forward, and we must exchange ideas, knowledge, experiences. Those who do that, they aspire to create that momentum of change, and hopefully we're going to be seeing that. Obviously, in the US, you have so much experience of dealing with these mega fires, and Europe, for sure, can take many lessons with regards to incident management. And for me, because I'm very much into training, providing adequate training for the firefighters, for the crews responding, not only during the fires, in case of peace, because it's a big one. We need to strategically direct our aims also in prevention and preparation, not just bigger planes, more planes, bigger helicopters, more helicopters, suppression. There's a saying, I think it's from Pau Costa Foundation in Spain, that we have to start living with the fire. And I think fire has been with us, it is with us, and will be with us for many years to come. So, and of course, the climate change and the abandonment of rural areas and the backup of fuels in the wildland are the three factors that have contributed to that increase of intensity and the number of wildfires. But we have to be more resilient, become more resilient as communities and as fire services. So there are lots of lessons learned that we should aim to exchange and share with each other.
Yeah, let me hit a couple of points you just made.
Sure.
One is, the relationship between academics and practitioners has to strengthen. Not only do we need to share information and experiences, but the more academics you bring in, then the better opportunity you have for influencing elected officials to do something good for your agency. As agency members, at least in the U.S., it's very hard for us to go to an elected official and say, "Hey, here's what we need. Here's what you need to fund. Here's the laws we need to make things right." But an academic, having no tie to the agency, but having interacted with that agency and understanding the issues, can go to that elected official and say, "Hey, here's what they need. Here's the laws that will really help." So you can, I think, parlay that relationship into a good way to reach the elected officials and get some help in that direction. I think what everybody's experiencing is we're getting to the point where we're being overwhelmed by wildland fire and overwhelmed by the conditions that are there. Even the U.S., we now routinely ask for help from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and we can't do it all on our own anymore. I think that's pretty obvious. At one point in 2015, just in the states of Oregon and Washington, there was enough uncontrolled fire line to reach more than halfway across the United States because we just didn't have the resources to deal with the amount of fire we have. So what that's doing is it's showing how brittle some of our systems are. And we need to really kind of focus on that and understand where those breaks are going to occur and what the unintended consequences might be for some of those breaks or that brittleness in the systems, and plan for that as best we can, mitigate that as best we can. So I think everybody's going to be in the same boat, again, folks who don't have a lot of wildland fire experience, it's going to take them even a bit more time to catch up to the rest of us. So anything we can do to help them out is obviously a good thing.
Tell us, if you have time, of course, about the leadership, because within your Twitter feed you have put on about leadership, and leadership it's of great significance, very often being bypassed or not given the attributes that we should do. But leadership, it matters in my eyes. Leadership, it's not management. So if we want the change to occur, we need to build up on leadership. But I will appreciate your opinion, your thoughts.
Yeah, as one historian wrote, there's never been a topic where as much has been written and a topic has been so little understood as leadership. I think, in facing, I keep coming back to the word complexities, but that's we live in a world of increasing complexities. And to deal with that, you have to have a different kind of leadership, maybe in the image of the leader we have in our mind. The best leaders that I've worked under on some of the biggest, most stressful fires are the ones who are not involved in everything. They give you good objectives and trust you to make good decisions based on those objectives. And you don't run to the incident commander for every little decision. You're empowered to make those decisions. And I think that style of leadership, that leadership by offering good objectives, training your employees well, trusting people to make good decisions in line with those objectives, I think that's got to be where we go. And that has become more and more a function of how we use ICS. incident command system.
Mm-hmm.
And that also has the benefit of, and I think you can make a really good argument for the incident command system, not just a way to manage incidents, but a stress management tool as well. Because if you have everyone who's trained properly, they know their role, they know what they're going to do, they have a good, good experiences, good expectations about what needs to be done, then the stress comes not from figuring out how you're going to manage the incident. The stress only comes from the incident itself and the challenges that it presents. If you're sitting there trying to figure out what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, and if that interferes with somebody else over here and what they're doing, that's just added stress. Incident command system sets things up to where, everybody has their own responsibilities and can make their own decisions, and you generate trust throughout the team so that you're allowed to make those decisions. And I think that's got to be where we're going. A top-down hierarchical approach is not going to work on complex incidents because there's just too much information to understand, too much specialization that's going to go on for one person to be able to say yes or no to every little decision. And it's going to slow you down as well. In incidents, speed is of the essence, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I have trained by the British model, we have this span of control within the incident command system, which is basically what you discussed previously. Yeah. So I'm just going back to your feed because there are so many points within your feed. To actually cover them all, we're going to need a couple of hours, but I don't want to keep you for long. I really appreciate that you have your time for us today. So what will be your message to Europe? I know you have written in your feed. What will be your message as a firefighter, as a practitioner, as a person that has been involved in fires of immense gravity, of immense mega fires, let's say?
Yeah, I would say that the first one is endeavor to be a learner and try to build a learning organization where you learn from not only any number of sources that you have available, but you learn from your failures as well. And that you have an organization that can be trusted to learn from failures instead of blame. This world is too complex for us to say, hey, you screwed up, we're putting the blame on you. If that person was well trained, if that person was a good firefighter and they made a bad decision, then can't we assume that a similar firefighter with similar training would make a similar decision under those conditions, under those circumstances? And so we need to learn from why that decision was made, why that firefighter chose that decision versus other ones. And if we can understand those conditions and identify those conditions, then maybe we can say, okay, in the future, when we see this happening, then you may be tempted to make decision X, but you really need to rethink that and look at these other options before you go down that path. So, I think being that learning organization, being able to accept failure and not penalize people, and being able to really learn and strengthen the organization because of failure or through failure is really key. And then, of course, the learning organization, also you learn from successes as well. So you celebrate those as well. But where the rubber meets the road is when there's a failure on a critical incident. How do you learn from that? And how do you move forward? And how do you incorporate that into your culture? So learning, I think, is constant. It's a key. And, I think it's the same kind of principle as leadership, right? If you think of yourself as a leader, you're probably not a leader. Leadership, the title of leader is given. it's not appropriate, right? So what you should be doing is striving to learn as much about leadership as you can and practice that. And then let others decide if you're a leader or not. But you're always striving towards leadership, and you're always striving towards learning. You're never satisfied. You're never at the point where, oh, I've learned all there is to know, or hey, I'm now a leader. No, you got to keep going.
I absolutely agree with you. If a person claims that he or she are a leader, they fail to be actual leader, because a leader is a title that is given by others, as very well you said. And I think that would be one of the greatest challenge, to condition ourselves to change and condition ourselves to a different reality, because it is a different reality, and it will be a great challenge to convince the people that have conditioned themselves into the previous situation, to the previous status quo, that we put the wet stuff on the red stuff. We need to make these people understand where we are and where we're heading, because this is not going to be easy. We need to be more resilient with fire. We need to understand fire. This is where the academic sector comes in, because they have the tools and the knowledge to feed us, the practitioners, with the immense knowledge. This has to be a holistic approach on wildfires. I think that's, for me, in my eyes and in my knowledge, 70 years in the sector, and we have to see things holistically. We can't train people but leave the prevention side. We cannot prepare but leave suppression on the side. We need to see everything on a holistic level and take actions upon our results. So it's we need to trial. If something fails, as you said, change it until we get it right. It's so dynamic, as the fire itself is so, as the wildfire environment is very dynamic. It's also the shift of the culture with the people. It's so dynamic. There are so many different personas out there, and so many perceptions, and the perception of the risk again goes. It's different from a person to person, and it's different from communities. For example, some communities they believe they're immune to wildfires, and all of a sudden they have been affected greatly by fires. Like the Paradise in US, it's a great example of that fire. Nobody believed that the initial calls from Paradise would make the destruction as it did, and it claimed so many lives and so many thousands of homes and that vast territory. So things are changing, and we need to adapt to it and become more resilient. And yes, we need to communicate with each other. Communication, that's the key.
Yeah, just kind of speaking of Paradise, I think over the last 10 years at least, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people who've said something like, oh, we just don't get fires like that here. I don't understand what's happening. Well, now you do get fires like that here, and you're going to get more. And that's a message that we have to get out. A few years ago, we were measuring, like when I first started in wildland fire, we were measuring large fires in, the thousands of acres, and in maybe the hundreds of homes lost. And now we're measuring wildland fire in hundreds of thousands of acres and thousands and thousands of homes lost, and now double digits of fatalities. So we've just seen that progression go up and up and up, and I'm not optimistic that we're at the apex yet. I think we've got a lot of challenges and a lot of tragedy in front of us, but we'll do the best we can, and I know that all of you will too. One of the things about going back to that leadership question, one of the problems we have in the United States with the incident command system is after the attack on the World Trade Centers, when our Department of Homeland Security was created, the law mandated that all structural fire departments and police departments and so on start using ICS. And what happens is that you take your existing organization and you just paper ICS over it. The police chief becomes the IC, the fire chief becomes the incident commander. You know, the person responsible for ordering engines becomes the logistics chief, and so on. And there's no appreciation for the challenges of a long-term complex incident based on that. And so it takes a generation and some advocates within that organization to really come to accept and implement ICS fully. And you know, whether you're using ICS or not, I think that same dynamic probably applies to many places, in that here we have our old system and here we have new conditions, and they're not quite meeting up yet. And so we need to get that generational thought going and change the perspectives of folks.
So prior to the attacks at the World Trade Centers, you didn't have any incident command systems in place, or you had any change them?
We had an incident command system within the wildland fire world,
okay.
And we had the Coast Guard had recently started using the incident command system. So when the attack on the trade centers happened, folks looked around, and the only thing that was there was the incident command system. And so they said, okay, we're going to make this national. And so they did in some ways. And so now everyone throughout the U.S. has had incident command system training. You know, one of the, I guess one of the pieces of information that kind of led to that is when the trade centers collapsed, the urban search and rescue team from New York City, they all died in the collapse, as I understand it. And they were the only ones in New York City who knew about the incident command system and had practiced it because they'd been on incidents outside of New York City. And New York City Fire Department was always big enough to where they could handle anything that came their way, except for this. And so they needed help. And it took some time. A wildland fire team from the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, went to New York City right after the bombing. And it took a while for FDNY, Fire Department of New York, to start trusting them. But once they did, they started to see the benefits of the incident command system. And now they use it heavily on all of their incidents. And they even have a Fire Department of New York incident management team that goes around the country and helps respond to incidents. So they've embraced it in a really big way, and partly out of necessity, obviously. But they've also had now a generation of folks who kind of came up being exposed to that, and now it's really enmeshed in their culture. And I think that's what you need.
It's very interesting how things change when a significant incident like this occurs. Of course, what happened is tragic with all these poor souls out there. The firefighters also. I think the 343 first responders that died that day. It's a day marked in the dark pages of this world. So, Jim, I think we covered a lot of things today in this 1 hour. I don't want to keep you longer. I am compelled to say a massive thank you for your time. If a person provides another person its time, it's the most important thing. Our time it's the most valuable to us right now, and I am grateful for your time, and I really appreciate that you shared this information with us in Europe. Hopefully we're gonna have a discussion in the future, maybe into a panel with some more colleagues from Europe and US. It would be a great day to exchange some information. We can discuss this post this interview. I wish you well for you, and I wish that fires will not impact the U.S. as they currently do.
Well, thank you for that. And, you know, I hope that everyone understands that we're heading into the unknown in many ways. And that's going to create a lot of stress. And it's also going to create a lot of exposure to difficult events for firefighters, be they serious accidents, injuries, fatalities of firefighting personnel or the public. And so, you know, I just encourage everybody to understand that there's no shame in asking for help, because we do extremely stressful work. And if we need help, we need to ask for it. And there's no shame in it. And take care of each other, take care of yourself, find people you can trust to be honest with you about, to say, hey, you need a timeout, you need to go relax, or you need to do something to get your mind off of what you're thinking about right now. So I think we've really got to look out for each other going forward. And I think conversations like this will certainly help.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So here it's 11 past 11 nighttime, 11 past midday. So there, what time is it? It must be 1.
It is 1, yes.
It's 1.
Yes.
So I wish you a good day.
Thank you. By the way, I am thinking about going to a Fire Ecology Across Boundaries conference in Florence in October. Is that something that you go to? Do you go to those kinds of things?
In Florence, in Italy?
Yes.
It's about wildfires?
Yeah, it's Fire Ecology Across Boundaries, Connecting Science and Management. Definitely about wildfires.
When it's that, so Jim?
It is October 4th through 7th.
4th to 7th.
Yeah, I'll send you the link if you want.
Please send me the link, because I was planning with my family to go in Italy around that time. So I might have that in conjunction.
Yeah, well, if you do make it there, we'll definitely have to get together and have a meal or something.
Absolutely. A couple of bottles of wine.
Right on.
Right on. So Jim, thank you so much. Appreciate that, your time, and we'll catch up soon.
Okay, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.